Tactical shooters aren't exactly known for their single-player offerings. Whether it's the fast-paced and brutal skirmishes of Insurgency Sandstorm, the drawn-out engagements and wargaming of SWAT, and really anything in between, tactical FPS games are almost always multiplayer romps. Almost always. There was a time in the recent past, which really isn't all that recent anymore, when tactical shooters dabbled with delivering single-player experiences. Two major series come to mind in particular, the first being the Rainbow Six franchise. That's right, R6 wasn't always a 5v5 Counter-Strike adjacent sweatfest. At one point, the developers behind the first few games actually, well, almost gave a shit about realism. The first few mainline installments of the franchise were genuine, hard-to-the-core tactics games, almost entirely focused around a single-player campaign, in which the player leads a small group of elite Special Forces commandos through various levels, with varying objectives, namely rescuing hostages and neutralizing plenty of capital T terrorists. Of course, as we all know, this really didn't last. After the cancellation of Rainbow Six Patriots and the release of the either much maligned or much loved Siege, the series effectively became a money printer for Ubisoft. The multiplayer skirmish mode of Siege became so popular to the point of being an esport. So I really don't see a single-player comeback for R6 unless there is some pretty substantial financial backing. So that's what happened to one series, the more mainstream one as it goes. The other classic tactical shooter series that comes to mind, though, is the SWAT series, which itself was an extension of the Police Quest games. A series of police simulation games started all the way back in the 1980s, the infancy of modern PC gaming. They were strange, hybrid sim and point-and-click adventure games, with a large focus on the more grounded police work compared to its peers. That was until the first entry in the SWAT spinoff, which focused entirely on a special weapons and tactics entry team and the various missions that squad went on. With a ton of cheesy full-motion video, the game was as close as the series had gotten to putting the player in the shoes of an officer of the law, and by the time that SWAT 3 released, that vision had almost been fully realized, with the player having full autonomy over their character and a surprising breadth of commands to issue to their squad, a core part of the SWAT series. But while that technology was there to make the game almost fully realized, it didn't really play all that well. While yes, it was functional, the game lacked a certain level of polish to make it appeal to a larger audience. And like many games of its kind, review scores were amicable, but the sales weren't all too incredible. So the SWAT series was shelved for the time being. As the years passed and the millennium came and went, video game technology progressed exponentially. The world that SWAT 3 so desperately wanted to realize was not only theoretically possible, but it was already being done. The fourth game in the series would release 6 years later, and it would be, in my opinion anyways, the last true single-player tactical FPS. The last hurrah of what was seen as a commercially unprofitable genre. Released in the good old year of 2005, SWAT 4 is a first-person tactical shooter developed by Irrational Games and released by Sierra Entertainment. If the name Irrational Games sounds vaguely familiar, that's because they made a few games, just a few lesser-known titles, System Shock 2, BioShock, BioShock Infinite, and, well, some other stuff. But not counting this game, those are their biggest contributions to the gaming sphere. But history repeats itself, and like all great games made by niche developers, the game reviewed really well and had mediocre commercial performance. It sold well enough to get an expansion pack and a very dedicated cult following, but it was the end of the Police Quest series, for the time being anyways. And that was, Jesus Christ, already over 20 years ago. But with 2 decades of hindsight and a spiritual successor in the form of Ready or Not, the game has had a rebirth in the popular gaming zeitgeist. With all of that being said though, actually getting the game running is, well, like all games of its time, kind of a pain in the ass. SWAT 4 is a strange game to even buy. First off, it's not available on Steam. Not a huge deal, you can get it on GOG for like $12, but I'm sure for some people that's already a deal breaker. This isn't a review of the GOG store, but seeing as this is my first experience using it, I think it's actually pretty good. Obviously, I'm more used to Steam and all of its intricacies, but GOG is still pretty good. I've bought a few games on there since then. So, you get the game from GOG, now what? It runs well enough, but it doesn't have proper widescreen support, and the default FOV is fine at about like 85, maybe 90-ish. Really the usual hoops you have to jump through when you buy a game like this. With that being said, most of these are pretty easy fix, with the exception of the FOV, which I really couldn't fix, I didn't know how to. Sorry in advance for the tunnel vision. The resolution is easy enough to get to though. Just go into the main config file, change some numbers around to your monitor's resolution, and the game already runs with an uncapped frame rate, so that won't need any fixing. And really that's all you need to change per se. The game is still playable without any other fixes, even if it for some reason decided to just start randomly chugging at certain points with absolutely zero rhyme or reason. Instead of jumping through various technical hoops on your own, you could also install the Elite Force mod, which includes various various technical fixes, as well as a bunch of drastic gameplay changes, and for the sake of this retrospective, I really wanted to keep the game as vanilla as possible. I did play through a few levels of the game with this mod, just for comparison's sake, as it's still worth checking out for a second playthrough. With all of that being said though, now that the game is functioning, I think we can actually, talk about the game. Like any good immersive sim, yes, SWAT 4 is an immersive sim and I will die on this hill, the world of SWAT 4 is richly detailed. While contemporary criminal sandboxes like Grand Theft Auto and Mafia are more often remembered when it comes to 6th and 7th generation cityscapes, I think that the City of Fairview, New York is easily the most well thought out and densely detailed cityscape of the era. The nature of this game being set entirely in a set of relatively small levels does make that a bit of a double-edged sword though. The broader strokes of larger open world games from the era generally make those more memorable overall, as considering the fact that 90% of gamers are likely to just cruise through a game. But the exhaustively detailed and incredibly grounded world of SWAT 4 is more rewarding to those who take their time, the kind of people who appreciate the little details. This sense is heightened by the fact that the game literally puts you behind the wheel of a character in this world. You're always boots on the ground, able to get a first-hand look at the muck and grime that have seeped their way into every corner of the city. The rundown takeout joints, back alley nightclubs, and underground gambling rings. And the nature of the game being a tactical shooter, you're likely to take things slow anyways. But even then, not every tactical FPS game of the era had the same level of care. Let's look at Rainbow Six 3, in my eyes the closest game graphically and thematically to this one. Where SWAT 4 takes great pains to flesh out its world, Raven Shield is ostensibly less concerned with creating a rich environment. Sure, there is a far larger variety of environments, granted by the fact that you're playing as a team of globetrotting counter-terrorist agents, but they all feel more like video game levels rather than feasible places. The levels of SWAT 4 are extremely enticing. Nearly every little detail is accounted for, and despite the fact that I have some gripes with the gameplay, I'm immersed like maybe 99% of the time. Every place feels like it could feasibly exist. And despite the game, looking like a game from 20 odd years ago, the little details keep it feeling alive. Take the first level for instance, the Food Wall Restaurant, an otherwise ordinary Chinese food place housing an illegal weapon modification business on the second floor. The proprietor, Neo, yeah, okay, irrational, very funny, modifies weapon magazines to increase their capacity. But Neo's attachment to his profession goes beyond the text at the start of the mission. The space he lives in is an extension of his character. Adorning the walls of his workshop are posters of scantily clad women holding guns, apparently from an in-universe magazine called Cool Guns. His main shop corner is a mess, containing bins of parts and tools along with plenty of guns to boot. Even looks like he was actively working on something when the raid happened. Across the spectrum, he's a gun nut. Very few games of the time, and even now to some extent, go to such great depths to realize their characters like this. This guy appears in one level as a secondary objective, and has one, maybe like 2 lines of unique dialogue. But despite that, the developers took their time to make his story fleshed out, even if we only get a little peek behind the curtain. And every level in the game is like this, trust me, we'll be getting to them later. But the bottom line is that the world of SWAT 4 is one that, despite genre norms, is incredibly detailed and full of life, even to the point where story-focused games often fail to replicate it. But before we actually get into exploring all of the levels in this game, we should probably talk about the game part of the game, because at the end of the day, this game still revolves around you going into a place and shooting a bunch of guys, or tasing them, or maybe shooting them in the head with a beanbag shotgun, which would realistically kill them, but hey, it's a video game, just have some fun, alright? SWAT 4, as I'm sure you can understand by this point, is an incredibly unorthodox shooter. This extends to the gameplay, which itself is virtually unlike anything else outside of the SWAT series. Comparing it again to Raven Shield, a game where pretty much the only interaction that one can have is shooting people, SWAT 4 is a hell of a lot more hands-on. The nature of the player character being an officer of the law already creates a predicament. Police officers have to follow a strict set of rules, called the Rules of Engagement. These rules are what set this game apart from any other in its genre, since a cop would, well, ideally anyways, aim to keep everyone, even potential suspects and assailants alive, you can't go in guns blazing. While you can kit your squad out with some serious firepower, the goal is to get in and out with as few casualties as possible. The game is graded on a 100-point scale, and how closely you follow the rules of engagement is a massive factor in your final grade. This incentivizes the player to take things nice and slow, and puts more of an emphasis on the use of non-lethal equipment. And when I call this game an immersive sim, this is really what I'm talking about. The core gameplay incentivizes thinking things through as if you were really there. You're encouraged to use all of these tools at your disposal to, as the game puts it, bring order to chaos. Let's break some of these tools down. To start, you obviously have your lethal weapons. While the many incentives make using less lethal weapons maybe seem more counterintuitively useful, standard firearms have their uses. At the end of the day, making it through the level in one piece is what actually matters, and if you need to put a man down, that's just the way it has to be. Besides, you can still complete entire levels as a pacifist while still carrying all lethal weapons. By making clever use of throwables and positioning, you can still make suspects comply. On top of that, every NPC in the game has a morale stat. Flashing them, hitting them with stingers, putting them on the wrong side of a C2 charge, all of these lower this stat. Wounding them or putting them under heavy fire will also do that. So again, not a complete loss to bring only lethal weapons. You really just need to lower this number enough to, well, get the person to comply. Lethal weapons also have a far greater variety of uses and functions. Multiple different ammo types that have different effects on armor. Several of them also have the ability to switch between 2 different fire modes. Semi-automatic has the greatest potential accuracy at the cost of the lowest rounds per minute. 2 and 3 round burst amp things up, but force you to commit to firing more than 1 round at a time. And fully automatic is the ultimate monkey's paw. Maximum firepower for maximum recoil. On the flip side, less lethals are substantially more straightforward. Instead of having to play this delicate balancing act of not shooting a suspect for as long as possible, whilst also trying to get them to comply, you can just walk in and start blasting. Effective for sure, but I feel like playing this way kinda defeats the purpose of the game, because at this point it pretty much just plays like any other shooter but with a moodier atmosphere. And as it seems, a lot of other players thought this way too, since the Elite Force mod, the overhaul I mentioned earlier, makes some pretty substantial changes to the way less lethals work. For example, the main offender, the beanbag shotgun. In the base game, the beanbag shotgun might as well be your BFG. If it doesn't make a suspect comply with 1 shot, it'll do it with 2. With the Elite Force mod installed, shooting enough beanbags into someone will actually kill them, which makes sense, seeing as beanbag shells that the shotgun is loaded with are really just soft baseballs being hurled at several hundred feet per second. Makes sense that a few of these to the dome would kill a guy. The equipment, though, is a different story. I think every single piece is actually worth taking, depending on the mission, of course. There are 3 throwables, all of them non-lethal. You have your classic flash grenades, self-explanatory and easily the most useful of the 3, although their effect can be entirely neutered by cover. You gotta remember to do the little head tilt before you chuck one into a room too, because you can be blinded by your own flashes, and Irrational decided to implement what that would accurately feel like. Second on the list is CS gas, which is basically a form of tear gas. You can gas entire rooms with a cloud that's basically guaranteed to stun anyone caught without a gas mask, and that can be extremely useful, but also a bit of a double-edged sword. Suspects can get lost in the fog pretty easily, and if they're either masked up or just outside of the gas's range, you're probably fucked. Lastly, and my personal favorite, the stinger grenades. When they detonate, they shoot at 100 little rubber balls at ridiculous speed, causing suspects to go down via death by 1,000 cuts. While flashes can be mitigated by cover and the ridiculous morale of late-game suspects, if someone is caught in the blast radius of a stinger, they are almost 100% guaranteed to surrender. Besides the 3 throwables, there are still 3 other gadgets that you can equip. The most useful, and one that I take on basically every mission, is the Opti Wand. Pretty much just a camera on a stick. You can use it to peek around corners and under doors from safety. This is useful for obvious reasons. Being able to know with near pinpoint precision where every suspect and hostage is located in a room is absolutely game-breaking. Well, it would be game-breaking if it weren't for the fact that the camera's field of vision is very tiny, and the angle at which you peek under doors isn't always the most conducive for getting an accurate layout. Still worth taking on pretty much every mission, although if you're playing single player then really I'd only suggest taking it for yourself. Your AI squad mates can equip it and you can order them to use it, but instead of being able to see everything for yourself, you get a relatively vague description of how many combatants are in a room. And yes, I know I've mentioned the AI teammates probably a dozen times by now, but hold your horses, we'll get there eventually. The next piece of gear is one that really took a while to grow on me, the door wedge. I know, bear with me, it sounds pretty garbage, and depending on the level it kind of can be, but hear me out. When deployed, the wedge will prevent anybody from getting through either side of the door. So, if you have a room that has multiple entrances, you can wedge a few of them, blocking escape routes for crafty suspects. On some levels, this can be a game changer, as some maps have a sort of horseshoe design where they loop back on a central point. The last piece of gear, one that I really didn't use at all, the pepper spray. An extra option for those looking to stay relatively casualty-free. In reality though, I pretty much never take this, since there are far better options. Since the spray can be entirely negated by a suspect using a gas mask, virtually any other option is going to make more sense here. I'm not making a tier list out of these gadgets because I really don't care, but this one would easily get an E tier, it's pretty garbage. That's the last of your regular gadgets, but there's 2 more special ones that remain. You have 2 choices for breaching doors, well, technically 3, but only 2 to pick from in the menu. You and all of your squad mates always carry a multi-tool, which can be used to pick the lock on a door. The slowest but easily quietest approach, as it won't alert any of the suspects on the other side of the door. Second is the quickest and my preferred method, the breaching shotgun. Just line it up with the handle and go to town. Very, very loud, but easily the fastest way to bust a door down. Depending on the door, you might need more than 1 shell, but it's really not a huge deal. You get plenty of shells at the start of the level, and since the thing is utterly useless in combat, there's no incentive to use it as a weapon. And lastly, for those looking to make a really big fucking hole, C2. The quintessential breaching charge, can tear a door to shreds, and even has the benefit of being able to stun suspects who are close enough to the blast. Be wary though, as it can detonate other nearby explosives too. Not a problem in 90% of the game's levels, save for exactly one which we'll be getting to eventually. And really that's all for mechanics relating to gear. All up, each gadget and weapon, with the exception of the spray maybe, which I really don't recommend, has its own niche. And miraculously, with only a few exceptions, every weapon and gear item can be viable on pretty much every mission. But you're not the only one using these tools. At its core, even beyond just being a cool police shooty game, SWAT 4 is based heavily on communication. This is easier when you have a lobby of 5 people to play with. But when playing single player, like me, because I don't have any friends who play old, weird, esoteric games like this, the game doesn't expect you to survive on your lonesome. No, that'd be probably fucking impossible. So, instead, the developers have gifted you 4 AI squad mates. These guys are the backbone of your team. Reynolds, Gerard, Fields, and Jackson. The 4 horsemen, and in this case, Officer Skell, are a true unit. You ride or die with these guys. And while Ready or Not's decision to make your squad mates more expendable in career mode was probably more realistic, they've traded away a bit of the soul that the AI squad mates in this game had. Whether you like them or not, you're with these 4 clowns for the entire game. They each have their own unique personality and background, and while it is almost entirely conveyed through text or small snippets of dialogue, they're still fleshed out in a way that very few characters in its spiritual successor had. Additionally, and pretty much stealing something that I heard first coined in Mandalore Gaming's videos, these guys have what I think falls into the category of professionals under stress voice acting. Despite trudging through hell and back, they keep a cool exterior when reporting back to talk, but you can still tell that underneath the facade of this cool tactical dude, there's a regular guy down there. They never open up, really it's not that kind of game, but little cracks form every now and then. Take Lead for example. During probably close to 97% of his exchanges with talk, he's calm, collected, and entirely formal, but on very rare occasions he'll see something that rattles him to his core, enough to show that he's still human underneath that armor. Finding out there are more casualties than expected at the A-Bomb nightclub, discovering that bombs have been rigged to the old Granite Hotel, and a few more notable exchanges that are also technically story spoilers, so I won't be getting into them here, but you get the idea. The Element, as they are referred to in-game, aren't the kind of guys to crack jokes on the job, but every now and then they'll comment on their surroundings. And side note here, I know I've been ranting about how a cop in a video game is stoic, but I just think this kind of writing is neat. It makes you pay more attention to the characters on screen, since they're not always shouting what they're feeling every 5 seconds. And on top of that, they're actually really useful in gameplay. Again, without these guys, this game would be nigh impossible. To start, they can do pretty much everything you can as a player. You can issue any number of commands through this contextual drop-down menu that is conveniently bound to right-click. Breaching a door alone has several options. You can just have them open and clear, which is the default option. Pretty simple, but can easily lead to your guys getting wiped in like 20 seconds. So instead, you can have them open with a flash or a stinger. If a door is locked, you can pick whether or not they're breaching with C2, a breaching shotgun, or if they should just pick the lock. They can wedge doors, use the Optimon, check the locks, all of this for just one interaction with a door. Then again, a lot of this game is spent huddled around a door choosing what you're going to breach with, so I really suppose it's fair that this aspect would be fleshed out a little bit. The team can be split into 2 groups, Red and Blue Squad. Good for covering multiple doors, or if you want one squad to cover a door and one to cover lead 6. You can also order them to use specific gear items on suspects, especially helpful when you yourself didn't pack any non-lethal options. It's always a good idea to kit at least one guy out with the beanbag shotgun or the taser. And speaking of which, you get to choose every single piece of gear that you or your squad is rocking on every level. Everything down to the individual ammo types on each weapon. You can make everyone as versatile as possible, or kit each member out for a more specialized role. Having one guy be the dedicated stinger or flash expert, maybe having one person the dedicated less lethal specialist. Really, there are only a handful of things they can't do. Well, only one major one. Namely, they can't report anything back to talk. To get proper credit for an arrest or picking up any evidence, lead has to report it manually. But your squad mates can't do that. They just can't. You can have them arrest suspects, but there's no option to have them radio it in to talk. Which means that even if they've cleared out an entire room and arrested all the suspects, you still have to go through and report everything yourself. It's one of the quality of life things that I think Ready or Not actually improves on. If you make one of your squad mates arrest a suspect, they will automatically report it back to talk, making the entire gameplay process like 40 times easier. Obviously that's not the only quality of life improvement, but I feel like that's the one that I like the most. And since we're also on the topic of NPCs, the way that this game handles opposing NPCs, like many other features in this game, as I'm sure you've gathered by now, is very different from its contemporaries. Other games, whether they be part of SWAT's genre or not, only contained enemies built on simplistic barks of ideology. For instance, the Wehrmacht soldiers of the first Call of Duty game had their incredibly complex ideologies and beliefs distilled into lines of dialogue that 90% of players can't even understand, because, you know, they're in a different language. But SWAT 4 took extra care to depict the people you go up against as more than just a string of code. To start, the game never refers to any of the forces you combat as enemies. They're always treated as suspects, no matter how many laws have been broken or how much blood has been shed. This already goes a long way in establishing them as characters in a world, by creating the idea that, regardless of how dangerous they are to be treated as suspects and treated fairly under the law, a player is already encouraged to think more critically of them. They aren't just a collection of polygons with a gun and a big red target on their head. They're desperate drug addicts seeking fuel for their next fix. A disillusioned cult member pushed too far over the edge. A xenophobic militiaman, hell-bent on returning America to isolationism. Of course, this doesn't extend to every group of suspects in the game. Sometimes the methodology behind crime really is just financial motivation. But in the cases cases where the developers went out of their way to represent this aspect of crime at all, it's genuinely fascinating. And even 20 years later, I still don't think it's been done better. As much as Ready or Not has been praised for its willingness to more accurately portray modern crime, at least until it wasn't, I feel like a large portion of that game rested solely on shocking the player. Don't get me wrong, the way it's done is incredibly effective. Some of the scenes in those levels are incredibly disturbing. But that's it, really. I feel like to an extent the developers push the message right in your face. It gets the message across, but for many, myself included, it feels kind of flat. Again, I'm not trying to knock Ready or Not for having a more, let's say, heavy-handed approach to discussing its darker subject matter. I'm just comparing and contrasting here. But again, comparing it to this game, where it's far more subtle with its messaging, I find that it's pulled off far better. The game very rarely pushes it in your face, and even in the most grim moments, there is a level of subtlety that Ready or Not lacks to some degree. Again, all of this we'll get to when we actually cover the campaign mode, I assure you, but we still have yet to actually talk about how the AI works in this game. Well, on a gameplay front anyways. As I have stated previously, all of the suspects in this game feature a morale system. To actually be able to arrest them, you'll have to lower that enough to get them to surrender. That's a very truncated description of how it works, but in essence it works pretty simply on paper. Getting flashed, stunned with non-lethal weapons, getting shot at, shouted at, all contribute to lowering a suspect's morale. And as the campaign progresses, this becomes increasingly difficult. In the beginning, when the toughest thing you'll be up against are some tweakers raiding a gas station, or some petty gang members having a shootout at a nightclub, they go down pretty easily. Sometimes all you even need to use is just harsh language. But as things progress, and you begin to go up against more ideologically walled-in suspects, things become more difficult. Sometimes you'll have to hit them with multiple means of subduing before they even go down. For instance, the Mountain Valley Research Center, the last level in the game, you go up against the Army of Faith, an incredibly dangerous eco-terrorist group set on destroying any research behind stem cells and cloning technology. On top of being some of the most heavily geared suspects in the game, they're also incredibly difficult to force compliance, and I think that is just so incredibly cool. Sure, the game can be a little bullshit with how picky some of these guys can be, but the fact that the developers went out of their way to implement NPC difficulty through how ideologically far gone they are is fucking insane. I mean, it provides an actual in-universe reason as to why the game becomes more challenging. Because, yeah, a regular crook with a gun is going to be easy to force compliance. But a heavily armed and ideologically walled-off eco-terrorist? Not so much. And the developers approach the hostages with a similar mentality. While most are happy to see you and will comply without any contest, others are less cooperative. They'll argue, shout, berate the cops, and even sometimes resist arrest, forcing you to subdue them like any other suspect, with some kind of less lethal means. They never turn hostile and you can't shoot them, but if you do end up killing any of them, the mission immediately ends because it's a fail state. But, altogether, the way that suspects behave and the logic behind it goes a long way in creating a game where the player actually has to think about who they're fighting, where, at some points, to a very, very small extent anyways, the line between fighting a string of code versus fighting a real person with an ideological background is blurred sometimes, and that is something I can't say I've seen in any other game. But now we're just left with the game's campaign, and the City of Fairview is one that has plenty of stories to tell. The first level in the game is the Food Wall Restaurant, which is one that I've already pretty much entirely gone through. It's pretty straightforward, and compared to some later levels we'll be getting to soon, it's incredibly low risk. On top of having to secure and collect Neo from the scene, you have the secondary task of neutralizing Alex Jimenez, a hitman working for the Colombian cartel and a frequent customer of Neo's. He can be a little picky, but he's not too hard to get down. In the end, the mission is more or less a warm-up round for the element. A few lightly armored suspects, and only a handful of civilians to worry about. The game does throw a bit of a curveball at you though, as one of the cooks in the takeout joint is actually in on the whole operation and is treated like a suspect. Okay, one mission down, and you might be thinking that the game is going to throw another more combat-heavy mission at you. Instead, you get an immediate curveball in the form of the Fairfax residence, one of the moodiest and most atmospheric levels in the game. The main target of this mission is one Lawrence Fairfax, the current #1 suspect in a string of murders. Recently, a string of 7 young women have disappeared while studying at the state university. Their remains would usually turn up a few weeks later, either brutally disfigured or entirely dismembered. However, the most recent victim to be found was discovered to have DNA scrapings that match Lawrence under her fingernails. On top of that, an 8th victim, Melinda Klein, has recently gone missing, and judging by Lawrence's MO, there is reason to suspect that she's still alive, so we better get moving quick. We arrive at the Fairfax residence in the wee hours of the morning. The sun is just beginning to creep over the horizon, as the autumn leaves fall upon this unassuming suburban neighborhood. It appears that in the current timeline, Halloween is right around the corner. From the outside looking in, the house seems pretty well kept, but the inside is a much different story. As you enter and this level's musical track starts up, a wave of history hits you in the face. The house is in a state of disrepair. Trash piles litter the floor and are stacked high against the walls. The wallpaper is visibly peeling away to show the disgusting mold that's beginning to take root. It's usually around here where you'll find Lawrence's mother. She's one of the more belligerent civs in the game. Not dangerous, but entirely uncooperative. If you want to get her to comply, you'll have to use a little bit more persuasion, we'll say. No father figure is present in the home. He's been dead for some time it seems. Lawrence doesn't sleep in his old bedroom. Instead, the space has been repurposed for extra storage, and in that storage is a lot of newspaper. Rather strange thing to stockpile. And there's one more thing I want you to take note of before we enter the basement, that being this radio. It's set to a local news station where a reporter is, coincidentally, interviewing Melinda's mother, Melinda being the girl that recently went missing. The voice acting here is, to say the least, phenomenal, which is good, but also bad, because this broadcast is just fucking harrowing to listen to. I'm not gonna play the whole thing because it's just absolutely heartbreaking, but if you want to go watch it, it's, I left it in the description, but still, word of advice, it's pretty rough. Really, I just wanted to bring it up to prove that yet again, how masterful Irrational is at this stuff. They've come a long way since System Shock 2, I'll tell you that much. Lawrence sleeps downstairs in the basement, his man cave. In the nearby garage, we can find the van he uses to transport his victims, a classic horror movie trope it seems. His cave is a treasure trove of all kinds of depraved shit. Missing posters and newspaper articles line the walls, a perverted shrine to his accomplishments. In the center of the room, a TV has been set up with VHS tapes strewn about. God only knows what's on those. To be fair though, I'm sure most Redditors' rooms look like this, so it's not a huge deal. Although the missing posters do raise a bit of a red flag. On the central pillar, a police sketch of the man himself has been hung up, with a cheeky Unabomber reference thrown in for fun. But Lawrence himself eludes us, and there's still one more door to go through. Now at this point in the recording, I was still kind of on the fence about this game. Even if I wanted to make a video about it, when I'm recording, I usually give games an hour and a half at most, just to see if I'll like them, and if it's actually worth making a video about. And at this point, I was about 40 minutes in, and let me tell you, this next room pretty much sealed the deal on this video's existence. As my team breaches the door and we walk into the adjoining room, there's a makeshift wall set up. It is just barely enough of an obstruction to force the player to walk all the way around the curtain to see what's fully on the other side. And what you find isn't something I'm likely to forget anytime soon. As you round the corner, you find Lawrence's real dungeon, where he's been making what appears to be papier-mâché casts of his victims, the implications of which are incredibly disturbing, as you can imagine. What's worse is the woman tied up in the corner, her face partially obscured by a half-complete mold. This, however, is not Melinda. This is an unknown victim that appears to have been scooped up under the police's noses. And again, there is one more door to go through, and this time it appears to lead into some makeshift tunnel dug by Lawrence himself. And at the end of this tunnel is a cell containing both of our primary objectives. Lawrence goes down without a fight, which is nice seeing as you're already likely to be shook by, well, shit, I don't know, everything else in this level? Melinda is also present, still alive, although in very, very bad shape. Seems that Fairfax was keeping her alive just long enough to fully complete a mold, of which we can find a nearly finished product. The way that this entire level is set up, with it starting in the main house and eventually ending in the torture tunnel, is like a reflection of Lawrence's mind. We start on the surface, or at the beginning, with his childhood and upbringing. A childhood wrought with either neglect or poor parenting, probably both. Eventually spiraling into the darker recesses of his mind, going through his fantasies and culminating in the pinnacle of his darkest desires. And this whole level from bottom to top is just fantastic, and has forced its way into my top 10 levels in gaming. I'm not even kidding. It genuinely is that good. If this doesn't sell you on the game, then I really don't know what will. And if you are sold, then click off this video and go buy it. It really is worth it. The rest of this video is going to be spoiler city, so just go buy the game, it's worth it. Regardless, this level is a masterclass in gaming storytelling, and the fact that Irrational pulled it off with just bits of dialogue and environmental storytelling is incredible. Thankfully, the next level, the Quick Fuel Convenience Store, is far more cut and dry. A classic stick-up job by all metrics. The Quick Fuel Convenience Store is being held up by an unknown number of gunmen, the only positive ID we have so far being one Alice Jenkins. She was in rehab for an oxycodone addiction, oxycodone being an addictive substance similar to heroin. The nature of it being a legally prescribed drug makes it more readily available, as pretty much anyone with a prescription can turn and sell it. Judging Jenkins' history, this robbery was likely an attempt to get some more drug money, but now that she and her cronies have fumbled and taken, as far as the police know, 3 hostages, they're in a bit of a stalemate. Lacking the experience and planning to deal with this situation, there's no telling what they might do with those hostages. At the end of the day, it's a pretty classic cops versus robbers setup though. This level is a nice mental break from the previous one. No major earth-shattering discoveries here. Alice herself can be a little tricky to bring down, but ultimately the difficulty of this level is dictated by how you play it. Just be patient, check corners, use the Opti Wand, you know the drill by now. On the other hand, the next level is an absolute barn burner. The Atom Bomb nightclub can be a huge spike in difficulty if one isn't prepared for it. And I certainly wasn't. Compared to the 2 previous, more combat-oriented missions in the game, this one is an absolute war zone. We have reports of shots being fired between 2 rival gangs at the club, with a number of civilians caught in the crossfire. It's not exactly clear how many suspects are present on the offset, but judging by the shots ringing through the scene, it's clear that we're in for a fight. What's more concerning, though, is the fact that we're not exactly clear on how many civilians are still left in the building either, and judging by the number of wounded civvies when we get in, that number is rapidly diminishing. This level can be a giant pain if you're used to the comparatively lower stress situations of the previous missions. There are over a dozen armed suspects in this level, and it can be a bit of a pain to get around in. When I was down to a single suspect, I had to comb the level like 4 times over to find out where they were. Again, the level sizes in this game aren't that crazy, but since a lot of them like to snake back in on themselves at various points, it can be a little confusing. But after a few attempts, I managed to make it out with a score that I find pleasing. The minimum score to pass on Captain difficulty is 75, which sounds pretty generous, until you factor in that, oftentimes, even just having one of your officers get wounded will throw the score and force a restart. The next level on the chopping block is the Victory Import Auto Center. This one is another pretty simple barricaded suspect situation. Before the siege, 2 suspects were seen trying to jack a car, only to end up in a brief shootout with the police. They retreated inside the main garage and have been holed up there ever since. Despite only 2 of them being seen by cops, the number of suspects is entirely unknown, but at least 4 have been spotted, some even seen carrying automatic weapons. One hostage is known to be present, an overnight mechanic who was working late at the time of the shootout. He's the one that phoned 911 to begin with, and is presumably still in the building. So, with negotiations at an impasse, it's time for the element to move in. This is another one that can be a bit of a doozy if not taken seriously. You have 2 methods of entry, either on the roof via helicopter or by the underground parking lot. Both of these kinda suck. The parking garage has a number of darkened areas, and plenty of physical cover for suspects to hide behind, and the roof will always be safe when you choose to start there, but the only way in is via the main stairwell, which provides its own set of logistical challenges. Not to mention the fact that the game was just hauling ass here for some reason. Besides the mediocre staging areas, the level itself was also just really cramped and cluttered. It's not ready or not cluttered, but positively IDing suspects can be a bit of a challenge. This one took me a frankly embarrassing number of attempts to nail, and considering the fact that the game decided to start chugging for no reason, it's kind of a miracle that I managed to beat it at all. All that for what was essentially a filler mission. Thankfully, the Red Library offices, our next level, is pretty good. In the late afternoon, several gunmen stormed the Wainwright Mill Center building, smashing and grabbing their way through several of the businesses inside. What initially started as a hit on a local loan office eventually spiraled into them taking refuge in the Red Library offices, which at the time was likely one of the only buildings unlocked, due to the fact that most of their staff work on weekends. As all these things go, since they've set up shop, negotiations have hit a stalemate. 4 hostages have been freed, in exchange for 2 gas masks and a set of ballistic vests. Unfortunately, the freed employees were unable to give an accurate account of how many other civilians and gunmen are still in the building. This level is one of the few in the game to be set during daylight hours, and the game makes full use of this. The ceiling has several large skylights installed, allowing natural light to pour into the cubicle maze below. The place does seem quite nice to work in, even for a cubicle maze. On top of that, the level itself has its own unique personality. The Red Library has its own advertisements and slogans that can be found on posters around the building, fleshing out an in-universe company. Many employees are having their old CRT monitors swapped out for newer tech, although not everyone has been lucky enough to take part in the switch. Red Library specializes in mass data storage, so in the back offices you can find PC towers being stripped and just piles and piles of hard drives. All of this among several other little details that make the world feel, more lived in. And yeah, I know I already made an entire section of this video about the very details that make these levels great, but I feel like it's important to show that this extends to every level, not just a cherry-picked selection that I presented earlier. With all of that being said, this level is another doozy. Not as bad as the previous, but with how cramped some of the cubicle mazes can be, it can get pretty hairy. But comparing the difficulty of this one to the next level, this one is a bit of a walk in the park. Our next mission, Northside Vending and Amusements, is another absolute barn burner, quintessential SWAT 4 in my personal opinion. The Vice Squad has been keeping an eye on this place for a while, suspecting that it's an illegal operation for a bookkeeping business. Detective Walsh, the squad's plant in the operation, was recently invited into said bookmaking area, only for his wire to be discovered. His signal went dead a while ago, so it's time for us to move in. On the premises, we have reports of at least 3 known suspects. Louis Bacchus, the owner of the establishment up top, although his actual involvement is shaky at best, and the other 2 are Simon Gowan and Alan Crooks, both being the main suspected movers for the bookie operation. Vice presumes that there are more suspects on the premises, but without a detailed plan of exactly how big the joint is, it's not easy to say. Our only entry is the back door to the cover shop, and things seem surprisingly normal. Bacchus surrenders without any fuss, which is nice, but the presence of armed guards in the adjoining area doesn't fill me with much confidence. The door to the basement is barred, so we actually have to breach the door here here, one of the few times in the game where it's required for progression. Once in the basement though, we can confirm the validity of Walsh's statements. Before going dark, Walsh was gawking at the size of the operation down here, which ended up being warranted, because besides just being a bookkeeping operation, there is an entire casino down here. The entire place is very shoddily constructed, being heated by a coal furnace in one of the back rooms. I guess this is how they've managed to keep the bills on the down low. They've also managed to rake in a sizable amount of cash from this job. I mean, the safe in the counting room is huge. Safe to say that this has been running under the police's noses for quite a while. But while we're mucking around down here in the casino, we hear shots being fired, the source of which being from the nearby foreclosed laundromat. Apparently, the guys running the bookie job have bought out the joint and started using it as a front too. And that's where I find Walsh, along with some more senior staff members. Walsh is in bad shape, but thankfully still alive. Our next level after this, would you believe it, is another heavy hitter. The Duplessis Wholesale Diamond Center is a massive diamond retailer, complete with corporate offices up top and a large vault system. Shortly before closing, a group of armed assailants rammed the truck through the doors of the building, and started what was supposed to be a relatively quick smash and grab. Of course, that didn't go to plan, and now the robbers have been holed up in the building for hours. Duplessis deals in wholesale diamonds, mainly raw stones, uncleaned, uncut, and unregistered. A fresh shipment of them had come in that week, meaning that the robbers' choices to strike today wasn't exactly a coincidence. They're going to be heavily kitted out in body armor and packing automatic weapons, so we better be on our toes. Worst of all, the vast majority of employees were on schedule today, meaning that most of the staff was present at the building at the time of the assault, so expect a lot of hostages. This level is another pretty straightforward one, at least when it comes to the premise. It's as close as the game gets to having a classic bank job, and difficulty-wise, this one is another pain in the ass. With how geared up the suspects are, and how many tightly packed rooms there are, the level can feel pretty damn claustrophobic at times. Doubly so in the vault, which the suspects managed to breach. This is with the help of their inside man. Just like in the food wall level, one of these suspects is disguised as a civvy. I mean, it's not that hard to tell him apart, he opens fire immediately, so it's not a huge deal. But this does explain the high coordination between the robbers, and how they managed to nail the week that the fresh shipment was coming in. With all of this being said though, the level isn't done without a little social commentary. The morons running the joint aren't exactly saints themselves. The entire operation is based around obtaining the diamonds from, technically not illegal, but highly immoral mines in Africa. Hell, the corporate bigwigs even have a presentation of how to change their tactics to avoid any social backlash. It's two methods of greed contrasted against one another, one in Kevlar and the other in a three-piece suit. Unfortunately, if you thought this level was a bit intense, the next is somehow even worse. The Children of Tyrone are an offshoot of a semi-major religious movement in Idaho. So if you think the regular religious wackos are intense, these guys thought that those guys weren't intense enough. Their leader, Andrew Tyrone, is seen as some kind of all-knowing prodigal son guru type figure. Classic cult leader behavior. Anyways, a few years back, these guys showed up en masse and purchased an apartment complex all for themselves. They only leave the building in small groups and have most things they need delivered if possible. Recently, though, we've received an anonymous tip, and after detectives ran the paper trail, they discovered that various chemicals and fertilizers have been shipped to the residence. I think you know where this is going by now. They're planning on blowing the place to smithereens, at least from what we know. We're not sure how long we have, or how many of the cultists are on the premises. We should expect them to be twitchy, though, and to keep an eye peeled for Tyrone, as he should also be there. With all this being said, we head in, and right off the bat, things are already pretty tense. The primary starting location in the main lobby leaves you pretty well exposed to anyone coming down the hallway or the first stairwell. You should pretty much always expect to deal with at least one, maybe two suspects on your way inside. The building is filthy. The Tyronians live communally, and with apparent low regard for their surroundings. They eat together, sleep together, and do basically everything with each other. And this includes, would you believe it or not, the manufacture of explosives. The place is stuffed with homemade explosive devices, and one stray bullet could set the whole place up. So you really have to check your fire, or just, use less lethals and gas grenades like I did. Difficulty-wise, this mission really isn't all that challenging. Every suspect is unarmored and packing low-tier weapons. The real challenge is presented by the environment. The tenement that they're in is a fucking labyrinth, with many rooms looping in on each other through homemade passages created by the Tyronians. They've combined several rooms together into larger spaces to facilitate their needs. One of these acts as a sort of surveillance center, in which they, worryingly, have a map of the city laid out. And with all of the explosives they've stockpiled, I'm sure you can imagine what they were planning on doing next. For most players, Andrew Tyrone is usually in the makeshift chapel on the second floor. In all of my attempts, though, he was found in the basement. The basement is connected to the children's bedroom, which is bizarrely empty. I mean, there haven't been any children in the game so far, and there won't be at any other point, but considering the number of families that moved in here, their absence is worrying to say the least. One can only speculate where they went, until they follow the trail of stars down to the basement. I think you can see where this is going. In the basement, the cement floor has been dug up to make way for several graves. Child-sized graves, neatly lined up in a row. Not much more really has to be said here, besides again having to give props to Lead's voice actor here. This is where I find Tyrone, along with an unusually high number of other suspects. Kind of ruins the moment when you can't actually take in the scene. because of the, 3 suspects being tear gassed in the background, but that's really it for this level. Pretty simple gameplay-wise, with one really effective gun punch right at the end. The next level, St. Michael's Medical Center, is another pretty straightforward one, at least premise-wise. Hyun-Jun Park, a South Korean diplomat, was attacked by several gunmen earlier that day. He was rushed to St. Michael's for emergency treatment, and without a proper escort being secured, his personal security went with him. Unfortunately, the same gunmen who attacked earlier managed to escape and have besieged the hospital for round 2, and this time they've brought extra heads. Park is a senior official in the Korean embassy, and has been a major voice in favor of reunification talks in Korea. His political stance is likely what made him a target in the first place. The gunmen aren't interested in taking hostages, so expect a very high body count. And high body count there is, because this level is just probably one of the most brutal in the game. Usually, most of the injured civilians we find before this are just that, injured. This level is one of the few in the game that I can recall having any DOA civvies. A lot of them, at that. The level itself has an incredibly foreboding atmosphere, heightened by the fact that our entire operation was exposed to the gunmen inside. Inside the main lobby, we can find a TV blasting a news report about the siege of St. Michael's, in which a reporter very clearly states that police have sent in a SWAT team. Of course, this broadcasts our arrival to all of the suspects in the building, making our entire operation 10 times harder, even after we cut the feed. Surprisingly, the gunmen aren't the only combatants we'll have to worry about though, as Mr. Park's personal security is still poking around. The nature of them being rightfully stressed about this situation will cause them to shoot us on sight, likely mistaking us for the gunmen in the chaos. Park himself is still alive and well, although suffering from the wounds he sustained in the first attack. The next level is rather uneventful story-wise, but it is my least favorite in the game. Why is that? Well, it's because it's just torture to play through. Well, for me it was anyways. Let me explain. On the surface, the Walcott tenements sound like a pretty rudimentary level. The Organized Crime Control Bureau has lined up a pretty hefty arms deal for us to go and intercept. The prime suspect is Ukrainian traveler Hedeon Koshka. His semi-frequent visits coincidentally overlap with the appearance of new Russian surplus weapons on the street. For the last 2 months, Detective Clark Jennings has been undercover in his operation, and has managed to provide the Bureau with a tip-off. Normally, the ATF would be responsible for this kind of job, but since we're the only guys on tap for such short notice, we're going in. The main goals of this level are pretty straightforward: neutralize Koshka and secure Jennings, along with the usual tasks. Sounds pretty easy, but oh boy, for whatever reason, this one took me hours to complete. And I'm talking like upwards of several dozen attempts, and I'm not even really sure why. The level isn't even that hard. I mean, it really is just a skill issue. The tight corridors of the Walcott project make for some nasty CQB work, but at this point we really should be rather well acquainted with that. With all of this being said, the level itself is actually pretty well designed, at least from a visual standpoint. The Walcott building is an abandoned housing project, a classic vice den. The place has been cleared out and left to rot. Fire damage has consumed parts of the upper floor, and the rest of the place has various vagrants living there. That was until the arms dealers showed up. Despite my misgivings with this level, it really isn't the hardest map in the game. That'll come later. For right now though, the next level on the chopping block is the Old Granite Hotel. America Now, what the game calls fiercely isolationist, anti-immigration domestic militia group, have stormed the building and taken everyone on the top 2 floors hostage. Militia here basically being a euphemism for domestic terrorist. They targeted the Old Granite specifically because of who was planning on visiting that day: James Betancourt, the heir to a large French property development company. Seeking both retribution for what they perceive as foreign influence on American soil and some easy publicity, America Now have besieged the building and taken Mr. Betancourt, along with his contractor Lawrence Adams, hostage. The nature of them being American militia members means that they're going to be packing some serious heat, so expect heavy resistance. This level is one of the few that switch up the regular SWAT formula in a major way. It starts off simple enough, but only if you choose to start on the 6th floor elevator, which puts you in the main hotel section. If you start on the stairwell to the 7th floor, the entire level is flipped on its head. As I mentioned earlier, what feels like forever ago now, I mean, Jesus Christ, this video is getting long, America Now have rigged the place to blow. 4 briefcase bombs have been set up at various points across the 7th floor, which is still under construction. Locating the first of these bombs will start a 9-minute timer, and obviously it would be a bad idea to let that timer reach 0. So, on top of having to deal with the active terrorist threat, you also have to defuse 4 literal ticking time bombs on a strict time limit. This, as you can imagine, makes this one of the most stressful levels in the game. Probably the most stressful. The entire game up until now has set you up for a slow experience, encouraging you to prepare for what's on the other side of the door. But all that goes out the window for a fast and loose, breach and clear style of gameplay. There's no time to use the opti wand or take precautions, just bang and clear. It's a genuinely fun take on the formula, and I wish other levels gave you some kind of time incentive, just enough to light the fire under your ass to keep you moving. But after the bombs are gone, the rest of the level is pretty easy. Both of our key hostages are safe, and the hotel section below is almost child's play compared to the brain hemorrhage-inducing 7th floor. But if you want more blood pressure-raising combat, I present you with the game's final level, the Mount Threshold Research Center. The Halogen Research Facility houses many projects related to stem cell and DNA cloning, which is likely why they were targeted by the Army of Faith, a religious terrorist group that have claimed responsibility for bombing several facilities known for stem cell research. This specific cell is led by Jean Truffaut, who was previously wanted for bombing several abortion clinics before going underground, and eventually re-emerging with the Army of Faith. The suspects inside have only released information on one of the hostages, Dr. Theodore Sturgeon. The nature of him being a major researcher for Hologen puts his odds of survival in the hands of AOT pretty slim. This extends to the other civilians inside, as well as any research documents that Sturgeon may have kept on the premises. What this means is we have to find his briefcase, which contains contacts for several other researchers in similar fields across the globe. If this was to fall into the hands of the Army of Faith, the documents inside would basically become a hit list for some of the world's top stem cell researchers. The suspects inside are heavily armed and ready to put down any of the hostages at will, so we really need to be on our toes for this one. The nature of this being the last mission in the game means that it takes the opportunity to jack up the difficulty one last time, making this level seem almost impossible at times. For one, if you alert any of the suspects around Dr. Sturgeon, they will go out of their way to stop attacking you and just execute him on the spot. The amount of times this ended my run is shockingly high. Secondly, all of the suspects are extremely resilient, often taking 2 or 3 methods of subduing before they surrender. And when it comes to Drafont, just forget it, be prepared to shoot the guy. The actual level itself also works against you most of the time, with the cramped passages of the laboratory areas, and half of the rooms having these little windows that suspects can see and shoot you through with ease. This level is a test of just everything. Most importantly, my fucking patience with this game. I shit you not, the recording for this level was 3 hours long. I put in probably over 50 attempts on this one mission, and most of them didn't even get past the 1 minute mark. Really kind of sours my opinion of this game at the 11th hour, but overall I still think it's worth it. This level just hurts my soul. But that is the last level in the game. There's no flashy ending cinematic, no fade to black, no pat on the back. You just get booted back to the level select screen and that's it. From here you can replay any of the levels you want to get a higher score, or to explore, but I'm sure most people are going to stop here. As I did, because I have had enough of this torture. This game isn't perfect, but for a long time, if you wanted a SWAT-style police sim, I mean, you really only had this game. And that's not a bad thing. This game is fantastic, genuinely brilliant at times, but it has its shortcomings, and as it became harder to access and harder to get running, it gained an unexpected cult following. It was the only game like it for so long that people had kind of stopped asking for a successor. I mean, you had the Elite Force mod and the Stechkov Syndicate, what more could you want? But now, with Ready or Not and the resurgence of popularity of this style of game, people are spoiled for choice now. The game is easily accessible on GOG and has plenty of great mods available now. It went from being this kind of niche tactical game to being the predecessor of this extremely popular, if controversial shooter. But that begs the question, why would you ever go back? Since Ready or Not exists, why bother playing SWAT 4? Well, obviously the first argument, and one that's really just the most solid, is that it's just a good game. People didn't stop playing Doom 2 when Eternal came out, that's just silly. But the other major factor, that's ultimately harder to explain, is the fact that this game just has an aura. This just confounding vibe that I can't place. Something that, as good as Ready or Not is, just can't compare to this. It's stripped back and comparatively straightforward gameplay-wise. It's not in your face and encourages players to look a little closer. It portrays things as close to objectively as it can. It tries its best to not pick sides on sensitive issues, but rather chooses to portray them for what they are. Sad, sad stories. All of these things come together to make something incredibly special. And despite my grievances with this game, I honestly can't say I'll be forgetting my time with it anytime soon.